participate in this. So actually, both Claudia and Dave really set me up for my talk here. So thank you very much. We did not coordinate this, I promise. But the kind of running title that I've been giving to this research program is not the boring title that I gave you all, Quantitative Research Programs Relating Metacognition and Consciousness, but in fact is Psychophysics, the Next Generation. So we are doing the Star Trek references and psychophysics all at the same time. Okay, so what are we doing? You're conscious, presumably you are all conscious. And so one of the things that we, I think, are all really interested in, both from our 4th grade selves all the way through now, is how is it possible that this happens? And I too have been interested in this since I was not in 4th grade, more like 17. And so there's, as we have also heard, a plethora, a veritable zoo of theories that are out there trying to solve this hard problem. And there are so many of these theories at various levels of explanation, various potential levels of explanation, that there is in fact an entire research grant-making program from the Templeton World Charity Foundation called these adversarial collaborations, which is kind of like the Mad Max Thunderdome of science, where you put 2 theories in a dome and both of them enter and then one theory leaves. At least that's the idea. And so I'm part of a couple of these, and I'll show you the results from one of those today. But the observation that kind of motivates this research program and the stuff that I'll show you today is more aligned with the higher order theories than some of the other ones on this list. And this is the observation that motivates that work, which is brains monitor the world. This is what we've been talking about, not just this week, but also for apparently the past 4 weeks. But they also monitor themselves. We have introspection. We have the capacity to tell when we're doing a good job with a particular task. And so maybe it's the case that these things are related to each other. They monitor the world, they monitor themselves. This may have something to do with consciousness. And so we're going to use this as kind of a kind of hand-wavy general working hypothesis. And we're going to build a research program around that. So let's start by talking about what this monitoring of yourself and monitoring of yourself monitoring the world might look like. So I'm going to ask for the audience to participate here and say, what is the thing that is circled in red? Just yell it out if you think that you know what that is. What's circled in red? Anyway, this is like, it's fine if you don't get it right. What is it? The fact that no one is saying anything is exactly what I expect. So there's not only you can identify, most likely this is probably a car or something like that, maybe, but you have a sense of confidence, which is, I really don't think I know what that thing is, right? And this kind of comes along for free in everything that we do in terms of monitoring the world. We monitor our ability to monitor the world. And our ability to monitor ourselves, monitoring ourselves, helps drive all sorts of adaptive decision-making in our environments. So if you are not sure that you're seeing this effectively, you're going to maybe slow down. You're going to not speed through the fog. How about this one? What's in the circle now? And this one, this clicker, man, it's giving away the punchline. Okay, so in all of these, you probably have a very low sense of confidence that you are, in fact, identifying the thing out there in the environment correctly. And so in the spirit of the earlier talks this week and higher level cognition in general, we're going to do this thought experiment with ChatGPT. And I'm going to say, what is the thing in the circle? And please give me a confidence rating. Or what is in the circle? I didn't even say thing. It assumed that I meant thing. Okay? Keep that in mind. All right. So it says it appears to be a vehicle, likely a car. I am 7 out of 10 confident. Seems a little overconfident to me. How about this one? Okay, maybe it's a road sign or a traffic sign. 6 out of 10 seems reasonable. How about this one? Do you have any idea what's in the red circle right now? ChatGPT is very confident, 8 out of 10, that it has gotten this right. Now, this is a very silly toy example, and I didn't systematically evaluate ChatGPT's capacities to do this task. But the point that I want to make here is really that large language models and AI in general, computer vision models, need metacognition. They need to know when they don't know. They need to know when they might be wrong. They need to know when they're going to need to collect more information in order to make a useful decision to begin with. And so if we want to build adaptive decision-making systems, we might want to try to reverse engineer this in us first. I'll point out that this problem gets much worse when you start to do cognitive tasks. Sorry, this is really little. This is the classic. We saw this a couple days ago, the man in the boat and the chicken or the goat crossing a river. How many trips does it take to get to the other side of the road? And ChatGPT still says 3, even though there is one man and one chicken, and they both can fit in the boat at the same time. And if you say, are you sure? It comes back and says, oh, let me do it again, and I'm still wrong. And so I think it gets worse as we go up the cognitive processing hierarchy here. So we're going to start with just perception and say, maybe eventually self-monitoring could alleviate these kinds of errors in our artificial systems. But let's start with the basics. Let's start with how we just monitor our ability to monitor the world. If we can reverse engineer that, then we'll be well on our way. Okay, so how do we do that? And what does that have to do with consciousness anyway? Because today is Consciousness Day. But whenever I use we, I'm going to refer to biological agents in general, because a lot of the findings that I'm going to discuss tend to generalize across not just humans and other primates, but all the way down into rats, so far at least. Okay, so a classic way to isolate confidence or awareness from performance, which by the way is really important because the better we do at monitoring the world, the generally better we think we do at monitoring the world, and that's adaptive. So we need to, in order to study metacognition, we need to isolate the confidence bit from the zombie brain performance processing bit. And so blindsight, which we heard a little bit about earlier, is a classic example of this. So this is the video that Lenore actually referred to in her talk. Thank you for setting me up beautifully. So in this video, patient TN is placed at the end of this hallway and is given a prompt, please walk down the hallway and avoid the obstacles. And patient TN says, are you kidding me? I'm blind. This is crazy. I cannot see. I do not believe that I can see. I have no confidence in my visual input. And so they've scattered a bunch of these objects in the hallway that they found in a closet, probably. And you can see that patient TN is very carefully, very capably moving around these objects. So the visual processing bit is working. Maybe not working perfectly, but it's working. And yet the patient still claims, I cannot see. I have no visual experience whatsoever. So the zombie brain bit is working. The consciousness brain bit is not working. The information is not being received into consciousness. So this is beautiful. And this is really exciting for me as a visual psychophysicist, because I'm like, great, now we can isolate the consciousness bit and we can do the neural correlates of all that and we can figure out how it works. The problem is that these patients are really rare. There's only a few of them in the world, and most of us are not lucky enough to have access to those patients. And they're all very heterogeneous because you can't go effectively lesioning patients and human beings. That's not cool. We've done a few blind sight studies in monkeys, but again, I'm a human psychophysicist, and I typically do studies on college students instead of on patients. And so what we'd like to do is be able to elicit something that looks like this behavior in college students. Blind sight-like behavior, so that then we can do studies with a high N, lots of people that we can put through the brain scanner, and figure out which bits of the brain are doing the consciousness part. Okay, so the classical way that we do that in college students is that we show you a thing on a computer screen and we ask you, what is this thing? And then rate your confidence or rate how well you think you saw it. And the problem with these classical experiments, even if you make the thing dim and hard to see, is that confidence typically covaries with performance. The better you can see, the better you think you can see. And they're also subject to a kind of floor effect or a criterion problem, which is that just because you said, I didn't see the thing, doesn't mean you had absolutely no visual experience of the thing. It was just like, it was small enough that you were unwilling to report to me, the experimenter, and you only had 4 buttons to choose from to begin with, so you pressed the lowest button. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try to fix that problem using psychophysics to see if we can design a bias-free paradigm for constructing performance capacity without awareness. Okay, so I want to create conditions where you can do a task, you can navigate down a hallway, or do a task pressing buttons to tell me what I showed on the computer, but you really truly have no visual experience to go along with that task performance. So the way that we did this is we showed people 2 stimuli. Here's a thing. What is the thing? Here's another thing. What is this thing? which one of those two did you see better? Or which one of those two decisions do you feel more confident in introspectively? And the sneaky thing that we now did is we actually showed you nothing in one of those intervals. So we show you a thing. What is the thing? Here's another thing, which is actually a nothing. What is that thing? And now, which of these two things do you feel more confident in? Which of them did you see better? And the idea is that when the target is absent, we've set a floor. There's nothing that it's like to see nothing on the screen, or at least there's nothing that it's like that isn't controlled for by the presence of stuff on the screen there. So like the screen is there and it's, emitting photons and so on. But the critical difference here is that there's something and there's nothing. And we're asking you to introspect on your experience of discriminating nothing versus something. Okay, so we do this with a classical approach psychophysically, which actually Claudia mentioned very briefly, that we're using a visual masking paradigm. This is classically a way of kind of interrupting the flow of perceptual information processing to make stuff harder to see. So I show you a target on the screen, but I put two flashy masks just before it in time and two flashy masks just after it in time. So I show you mask, mask, target, mask, mask, or I show you mask, mask, nothing, mask, mask. Okay? All right, and we make the thing when it's there at multiple different levels of contrast, so it's easier or harder to see, so we can get lots of different points along the psychometric function. And I'll show you what that looks like. So the idea here is that as the thing gets easier to see, you're going to get the orientation judgment correct. So I'm saying, what is the thing? Is it a tilted left thing or is it a tilted right thing? That's it. It's a very simple two alternative force choice task. As it gets brighter, it's easier to do that task. You're higher in your percent correct. And then on the y-axis here, I'm putting the percent of time that you're betting on the target present interval, okay? The target that's there versus the one that's not there. And if we're successful in turning off the consciousness bit, but leaving the performance bit alone, the zombie processing brain bit alone, we should see something that looks like this, where there's some capacity to do the task that is above 50%, which is chance, yet doing the task is introspectively no different from doing the task based on nothing at all. I've turned off consciousness. If I can do this, then I can go put you in the brain scanner and figure out which bits of the brain go with that. Great. This is what we're looking for. This is what we found. Not that elbow thing at all. We did 2 experiments, we didn't see it. We did more experiments, we didn't see it. And in fact, there's been a new paper that's been just accepted in Open Mind, where we used a tachistoscope, which shows things for like 1 microsecond at a time. And we still only see very kind of fuzzy evidence for the fact that maybe we can turn off consciousness using these methods. So it seemed like all the previous literature suggested we could use this technique or something similar to turn off consciousness and then study like the zombie brain processing so that we could co-vary those things independently. But it turns out it wasn't the case. So it turns out this is really hard to do. We did a follow-up experiment where we did the same thing, except that instead of using the tweezers of masking, we used the sledgehammer of transcranial magnetic stimulation. So I show you a thing and I zap you in the back of the head with a powerful electromagnet. And then I show you a nothing and I don't zap you, but I also counterbalance all the things. So sometimes you get zapped when the thing is there, and sometimes you get zapped when there's nothing there. And then I specifically look at the trials where you got zapped when there was something, and you didn't get zapped where there was nothing, and I'm basically doing exactly the same analysis. But now we see a different pattern. Now when I zap you, it made you worse at the task, but somehow you think you're doing better? So I zap you, and you're like, yeah, I definitely saw that thing. Even though by zapping you in the back of the head, I've disrupted the neural processing in your primary visual cortex such that you actually cannot see the target very well at all. So we explained this by building a very cute little toy ideal observer model that basically, this is 2-dimensional signal detection theory for those of you who are familiar. I'm not going to go into the details, but just suffice to say that this model does terribly at predicting human performance. But if we turn off the model's ability to introspect on its own noise, we dump a bunch of noise into the model and say, you have to guess at the noise instead of being able to actually introspectively evaluate that noise, the model does great. Okay, so maybe people have really crummy introspection, which is consistent with a lot of what people have thought. But I'm not convinced that just saying introspection is perfect or introspection is crummy is enough. I want to study the whole thing. All right, this is just another study that we did now a number of years ago, where we were also just looking at the relationship between the neural processes underlying performance on a task and ability to monitor your own task. So this is a face or house discrimination task. Here's a thing, is it a face or a house? And then how confident do you feel? And we did this in patients who had electrodes implanted all over their brains due to undergoing surgery for drug-resistant epilepsy. So we're recording directly from the surface of the cortex. And you can see that if we parametrically manipulate the contrast of the face, sometimes it's brighter, sometimes it's dimmer. When it's brighter, it's easier, and you rate higher confidence. So the bars on the right are taller than the bars on the left. So when it's higher contrast, you're doing better. And then the light gray bars are also higher than the dark gray bars, which means when you said you were more confident, you actually did do better. So introspection is not completely garbage, it's just sort of garbage. And then the take-home message here is from the electrocorticography recordings that we did. We saw that we can decode. So this is a support vector machine classifier. Just, what are you going to say, or face or house, or are you going to say high or low confidence? We can classify what you're going to do from your brain signals. But when we look at where those signals are coming from to be able to drive that classifier, they're really different between the performance classifier and the confidence classifier. So we see much more occipital contributions in making the face or house decision, and much more distributed, even frontal contributions from electrodes way up here in the frontal cortex when you're rating confidence. Okay, so confidence and choice seem to have very different dynamics and very different neural correlates. This is the system that all of this work is trying to reverse engineer. We have a stimulus that's out there in the world. We encode that stimulus somehow in a type 1 representation. We make a decision about it, and then we self-evaluate that decision that we made and the internal representation itself to drive confidence. This is the region that traditional psychophysics lives in, where we put stimulus intensity on the x-axis and then your ability to do some task or how bright you think the thing is on the y-axis. And what I'm calling now for is type 2 psychophysics. Doing psychophysics of the relationship between your ability to do some task, your zombie brain, and you, the conscious bit. So we want to put something objective on the x-axis, your ability to do some task, and then something subjective, your metacognitive evaluation on the y-axis. And then we want to look at how this thing moves around, how this thing changes when I parametrically manipulate what's going on. Okay, and so some ways that we can kind of parametrically manipulate what's going on is that in many of the cases that I've shown you, confidence is tracking accuracy, except in cases when it doesn't, when I use that sledgehammer of zapping you in the back of the brain and I make you terrible at the task, but you think you're doing great. So let's actually lean on that a little bit to do this second order type 2 psychophysics. We know that there are cases that we can induce in the lab where you can create conditions of high task performance, yet you think you're doing terrible, and low task performance, but you think you're doing great. We can do this with image manipulation that's as simple as just turning up the brightness of the thing on the screen. It's crazy. I know that the resolution here is a little bit low, but I actually manipulated these images so the signal to noise ratio of the image on the bottom is lower than the one on the top. But if I asked you which one of these would you prefer to say that you got right, you'd probably say the bottom one when I ask you to say like what's in this image. So we're going to exploit these, and we're going to use these to create systematic shifts in that relationship between your zombie brain's processing and your subjective evaluation of that. And then eventually, after we do all of that psychophysical work, then we can put you in the brain scanner and see what your brain is doing. Okay. So I did the definitions and background. I'm going to give you a real quick whirlwind tour, like 2 slides each, through a couple of the ongoing projects. This is unpublished data. And then we'll go back out to metacognition and consciousness and do a little AI at the end. Okay. So these are the people who did the work for this study that I'm about to show you. And I want to highlight specifically Brian and Alenka, who are really instrumental here. So this study is asking what happens to the subjective-objective relationship if we change how much stimulus is available on the screen, as I've just shown you. All right, our stimulus is this full field random dot motion. Looks like a snowstorm on your computer screen, okay, or like an old school screensaver. And I can manipulate the number of dots on the screen so that it's either flurries or blizzard. Can you all picture this in your minds, hopefully? And the task is, at some point, with all of these moving dots on every trial, one of these patches of dots to the left or right of the fixation cross that you're presumably looking at starts to move coherently downward like a little waterfall. And your task is which side had the little waterfall on it and rate your confidence. And I can manipulate the number of dots on the screen in a blocked design or an interleave design. So I have flurries, 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 blizzard, 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 blizzard. Or I have flurries, blizzard, medium, flurries, blizzard, blizzard, flurries, medium, and so on every trial. So if we plot the relationship between your ability to do this task and how confident you feel, that's the top plots, and your ability to tell whether you did a good job or not with your confidence, your ability to say high confidence when you're right and low confidence when you're wrong, that's in the bottom plots. We can see that in the blocked condition, dot density, the number of dots on the screen, makes no difference whatsoever. But in the interleaved condition, they start to come apart. More dots means you're more confident, and you can actually track your accuracy with your confidence better. So we've done something to the system just by changing the number of dots on the screen. We've changed your capacity to monitor yourself somehow. We quantify these effects by basically taking the integral under these curves, we color in the lines, and then we compare those areas under the curve using standard statistical approaches. And so you can see very clearly here that the block design, all the lines are overlapping, and in the interleave design, both confidence and this metacognitive sensitivity measure are very highly sensitive to that dot density manipulation. Okay, cool. So we're starting to build a library of how we can push around on the relationship between what your zombie brain can do and what you think your brain can do. We also can do this with attention. This is part of a collaboration with some of the same people, some different people, and also some people who are in this room, including Dave. And so this is one of those adversarial collaborations that I told you about. Okay, so now we're going to manipulate attention. And so the task is I show you this pre-cue here, this attentional cue, where one of these little 4 lines turns white, and that says pay attention to the quadrant that I'm pointing at with the white cue. Okay, so one of the cues turns white and it says pay attention over here because you're going to have to do something with that stimulus. And then the stimuli show up, and then a response cue says, okay, now respond to the stimulus that I'm pointing to right now. And most of the time when I say attend here, I'm going to say respond here. But every once in a while I say attend here, just kidding, respond over here. Okay, so I surprise you. The stimuli we're using are classic psychophysical stimuli, Gabor patches that are tilted left or right, or these are called figure ground, texture-defined stimuli. It's kind of hard to see, but these are like little ovals that are oriented vertically or horizontally. So your task is, what is the thing, vertical or horizontal or left or right, and how well did you see it? What was your subjective, introspective sense of clarity? And okay, so that's what I just said. This is a massive data set. We have 720 hours of data. Thank you very much to all of our college student subjects who participated. And this is the result. So same analysis that I did before, okay? On every one of these plots, we have performance on the x-axis and this subjective introspective evaluation on the y-axis. And you can see this really massive effect across all of them. But it kind of goes backwards. When you aren't paying attention, you have higher visibility ratings over the same range of confidence. Seems really backwards to me. When you're not paying attention, you think you can see better than you actually can. But that's what we're finding, and we're replicating it across 2 sites and across 4 experiments. All right. So, all right, that's what I just said. So I'm just going to there very briefly zoom back out of the data. Yes. Yes. That's a really good question.
Sorry,
so,
the question was about peripheral
vision. The question
is
where are they looking?
Yes.
Yeah. So we have eye tracking to make sure that their eyes stay on that plus in the middle of the screen. Yeah. So they cannot move their eyes. If they move their eyes, the trial aborts and it says, please pay attention and fixate. Yeah. It's a good question. Okay. All right. So why am I so excited about this? Because clearly I am. So this is the system that we're trying to reverse engineer, right? There's a lot of moving parts to this system. There's a lot of moving parts to any of the models that anybody in this room builds. But there's a lot of moving parts to this system, specifically because most of this is hidden from us. We, as the experimenters, have access to the stimulus, the buttons that our humans press to report decisions, and the buttons that they use to report confidence, and that's it. We have no visibility into the computations that are going on under the hood. And this means that this is an interdependent system. To build a successful model of this system, if we get this first level psychophysics right, it might not work for the second level. But if I got this second level right, but I happened to get the first level wrong, the model's still wrong. And I don't know where I went wrong because the entire thing is hidden from me. So building an ideal observer model of this system is really hard. A lot of the models that we build make very similar predictions in most of the experiments that we actually run in this regime. We went through this with an undergraduate student, actually, very talented, Ying Shi, last year in a publication, Open Mind. And what I've shown you is just the tip of the iceberg. So we're actually doing a whole lot of studies now. Can't fit them all into a half-hour talk, but we're doing a ton of studies, basically just trying to divorce the zombie brain from the you part of your brain to say, can I manipulate the consciousness bit or the introspection bit independent of all of the signal processing that your Tesla or your Roomba might be doing without consciousness? Okay, if we can do this, I think we're going to reveal the canonical computations, not only giving rise to metacognitive evaluation, which is what this talk has been about so far, but in a recent paper, I also argued that I think this is going to take us one step closer to building a coherent, complete generative explanation of how phenomenal experience in general is constructed. Tiny baby step. I am not proposing to solve the hard problem today. That's not happening. But I argued that metacognition is a step towards explaining phenomenology, specifically because it has a number of properties that make it a really lovely target for those of us who like to build psychophysical models. And those properties are, there's something that it's like to feel sure in your experience. There's something that it's like for you to feel that you've done a good job. So introspection produces phenomenology. Okay. But also, as I've shown you, this system is really hard to reverse engineer. There's a lot of moving parts and a lot of latent variables, which means that if we've built a model of metacognitive evaluation in the perceptual space that happens to do well under a ton of different experimental conditions, maybe we're actually onto something. So it has this precise sensitivity and specificity component that is missing from just type 1 psychophysics alone. It's also very practical. We can do things in the lab and so on. So if you would like to read 50 pages of me talking about this, you can go and read this paper. But the punchline is simply that this is going to take us one step up the hierarchy to do this type 2 psychophysics. This is going to take us a tiny baby step closer to being able to peer into the explanatory gap of the hard problem so that we can at least see where we need to go. Okay. All right, I'll also point out that I think that this is, and I'm not the only one calling for this, so there's a very explicit link to higher order theories of consciousness, which were already mentioned today as well. Higher order theories of consciousness say things like perceptual states are conscious if some metacognitive monitoring mechanism identifies them as reliable enough to presumably be real and not just internally generated noise. Or consciousness depends on a higher order awareness state that is directed at perceptual representation. So in Steve Fleming's work, he's basically saying that your brain says, is there a thing, anything that I should be conscious of? And if so, what is that thing? Okay, yes?
So I was going to ask you, like the previous speaker, you're using awareness as almost a synonym for consciousness here.
This is, Steve is using this as an awareness state, but it's, again, it's an access consciousness, not a phenomenal conscious statement. Yes.
Sorry, what's the difference between?
So Ned Block has this distinction between access consciousness and phenomenal consciousness. So access would be like global availability of information for further processing or for facilitating goal-directed interaction with the environment. And phenomenal consciousness is the something that it is likeness, the subjective ineffable experience of being you, the something that it's like to be a bat.
And you're talking about the first one.
These are talking about access consciousness. Yeah, so neither one of these actually like specifically gets at phenomenal consciousness. Yeah, it's a good question. Okay. Okay, and so In both of these, the person or system is going to take as real the perceptual contents that are actually real. It's going to label stuff as like, this is real. And so it's going to rise into consciousness somehow magically. They don't get to that part yet, but I think that, that metacognition plays a very serious computational role here. And so building a psychophysics of metacognition will get us there, or take us a step closer to explaining phenomenology. Okay. All right. I think I've just said this. Oh, by the way, yes, reality monitoring and determining whether there's something really out there or whether I just hallucinated it is also something that's really useful for an organism to do, to be able to tell the difference between I made this up or I predicted what was going to happen, and then there's actually incoming sensory information that tells me what really did happen. And so building a discriminator mechanism is actually very adaptive. Okay. Final bit of the talk is, all right, so I've argued that metacognition or introspection, it may actually be causally implicated in the construction of phenomenology. By studying it, we're going to get a handle on how that works. And I showed at the very, very beginning that maybe building smarter artificial systems that don't hallucinate and don't make silly errors might start with getting them to properly introspect. So now we have a moral conundrum, which is like, oops, might we accidentally make them conscious if we build these things into artificial systems? So very quickly now, at the very end, we'll talk about what that might look like and how this fits into a bigger picture of a research program that says, what happens if we accidentally, or might we accidentally build a system? How would we know? And this now relates to Claudia's references to the tests for consciousness as well. This is part of a report that I was lucky enough to co-author with Patrick Buchan and Rob Long that came out last August. And it got picked up by a bunch of news outlets that were very sure that we had come up with the answer, which I don't think is right. We came up with one answer that is most assuredly wrong in lots of different interesting ways. But this is the report that we wrote, which is how are theories of consciousness going to give us factors or markers or indicators that are like, okay, if an AI system ticks all of these boxes, we should feel at least a little bit more sure that that AI system might be conscious or might have the capacity for consciousness. And we start not from introspection, but we actually start by assuming computational functionalism, which is basically just saying that being able to produce computations of the correct kind, whatever that is, according to your theory, is both necessary and sufficient for the emergence of phenomenal experience. This is a working hypothesis. I'm not making a statement about the truth of this hypothesis. It's simply the foundation for the work that we did. Okay, so then we build these from current scientific theories of consciousness. Here are the theories that I put up at the beginning. We also looked at some other frameworks and preconditions. And because of this computational functionalism assumption, we needed to knock out a couple of these theories from our analysis that don't actually have computational functionalism as their foundation. So IIT and quantum theories do not have this like computations of the correct kind are necessary and sufficient for consciousness flavor to them. And I also have reason to be skeptical about IIT in general. And if you want to read a little bit of a rant about that, you can go see this paper that we put out last August as well. Okay, so the goal of this this study then, again, was to take these theory-based conditions that are putatively necessary for consciousness, build a checklist, and then actually see how current AI stacks up. And so we took a number of kind of popular theories right now: recurrent processing theory, global workspace theory, which we've talked about, the higher order theories, which I mentioned, attention schema, which Lenore mentioned, and then we also talked about predictive processing and these kind of agency embodiment kinds of theories as well. I don't have time to go through all of the theories and all of the indicators, but I'll just show you how current AI stacks up against this very cute checklist that we built. It's not doing so terribly, which is a little scary. These are the ones that I talked about before, by the way, that I've been focusing on for the rest of this talk, but you'll see that there are green checkboxes in some of these others as well. And while there isn't a single system so far that ticks all of the boxes that you see in green here, we do have systems that individually tick several of those boxes. And so if we were to put them together into one massive conscious Turing machine or similar, we might start to be in a little bit of trouble. And I'll just point out also that like this checklist, we need to take into account how similar other systems are to us if we're going to apply this checklist. So it might not be the case that the computations that are necessary and sufficient in us are necessary and sufficient in some other system. So there's like a plurality here of possible substrates and possible ways in which consciousness might arise. So in this paper, which came out earlier this year, we argued for this kind of taxonomy or hierarchy of like systems where if you have a test for this system, you can apply it to a neighboring system and it might still be valid, but you can't go applying it to octopuses or AI without thinking very carefully about what the implications are of a large leap like that. All right. So all of this is to say, no, I don't think we have conscious AI yet. There are a lot of people who actually might disagree with me. There's a really interesting paper by Clara Colombato and Steve Fleming that came out earlier this year in Neuroscience of Consciousness that did a survey of the general public and said, how often do you use large language models and do you think that someone is in there? Do you think they're conscious? And there was a striking positive correlation between the amount of time people spend interacting with these systems and how conscious they think they are, which is, I'm not sure how the causality works there, but the correlation is there. And so there are a number of people who actually think this now. We're not just in like Blake Lemoine land, like there's several people who actually think this beyond him now. However, it might be coming. As we build AI that better exhibits intelligence, flexible behavior and generalization, self-motivation, and self-monitoring metacognition, which I personally am very partial to as something that I think is really important for understanding how phenomenology arises in us, we might really soon have AI that fares much better on this checklist or on any other test that we build. And so I will leave you with this kind of scary thought, which is that maybe we are like just around the corner from this, but it'll be like now with self-reflection and capacity for suffering. And we need to be very prepared for that morally, ethically, societally. And I think that the recent proclamations from ACMS about the need for consciousness science and the development of moral and ethical AI is really important, that we need insights from what consciousness scientists are doing to drive this space forward in a reasonable way. Okay, so these are my open questions. This is the slide that we all got to prepare, and I think these have been super fun so far. Okay, so here are some sciencey things that I like to think about, some open questions. What functions does metacognition or introspection facilitate? So does it make us better learners? Does it make us better optimizers? Does it change across development so that it interacts interestingly with the explore-exploit trade-offs that Allison talked about a couple days ago? There's some really beautiful empirical and theoretical work in this vein, but I think that a lot more can be done, especially in the context of artificial intelligence. When is it adaptive or helpful, but also when does it hinder? So when do you get in your head too much and you start ruminating? And are there cases where we want to introspect, but only up to a certain degree? And then after that point, we need to act, as opposed to continue deliberating for forever. How does self-monitoring play a role in updating our internal models of the world or informing stable and consistent beliefs? So if you want to produce like a hypothetical or a prediction for what's going to happen next, you don't want to just check it against your world model, you want to check it against your self model too. Like, is this something that I think is likely to happen, not just that is likely to happen in the world? And that also then there might be this kind of pluralistic idea where metacognition is maybe just not one single kind of monolithic capacity, but maybe it's actually multiple things and might show up in multiple ways in lots of different systems. So we can think about this at lots of different of Mars 3 levels of analysis. And then I also wanted to take the opportunity of standing on this stage to point out that there are some things that I do that I'm really passionate about that are not part of this day job that I've just told you about. And that is, I'm really interested in workshops like this that help us create more effective and collaborative systems for doing interdisciplinary science, for bringing people together to have meaningful and productive conversations. But I'm also interested in doing these where we don't have to come together in person for a week. As much as I love being here in person and it's been fantastic, it would be lovely if we could include participants and populations around the world who don't have access to this kind of in-person workshop. And so something that I've been involved in for the past 4 years is I'm one of the co-founders of Neuromatch, which some of you may have heard of in here. Neuromatch Academy is an online computational neuroscience and deep learning summer school that's focused on building in virtual spaces collaboration, collaborative education, interactive community building, all of those good things. That was not really a sentence, but you get the idea. And we are in the process now of kind of growing up out of our academy roots and wanting to be more like an interdisciplinary science institute where we actually have folks doing research. So this is something that I think a lot about, and I think that people in this room are also like prime candidates for thinking about how to do this effectively as well. And then I'm also really interested in fixing science, not just from the collaboration component, but also from the credit assignment component. So as we get bigger and we get more collaborative and we start to engage in bigger and bigger group science efforts that are by definition, as interdisciplinary scientists, by definition, we need to have lots of voices in the room. So we need to move away from our current publication practices where we give all the credit to the first author and the last author, and then there's like everybody else in between. And so I've recently wrote a little bit of a ranty piece in the Transmitter about this, calling for action to try to fix this as well. Okay, that is it for now. I want to thank all of the people who helped do this work, all the funding sources, and if you think that you have some ideas about what consciousness is, we are running a survey where you can have some free responses and you can just type into the boxes, and we're going to collect from people all over the world, cultures, religions, everything, to try to get an understanding of what this means to everybody. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Allison.
Well, so this is lovely work, and I really like the idea of having this kind of new generation psychophysics for confidence. But something I was a little puzzled about is presumably both levels are mapping phenomenology onto the stimulus, right? So it's not really like the blindside case. I mean, is that what I'm not sure whether you intended that or whether.
Yeah, that's so this is a great question. So some of the components of phenomenological experience absolutely map onto the stimulus.
Okay.
But some of them, I think, do not supervene on the stimulus properties themselves. And so those are the ones that I think that we can get at, like a sense of urgency that might be independent of the stimulus.
Right.
Or a sense of confidence that might
Right.
be independent of the stimulus. And teasing apart which bits of the phenomenal experience are stuck on the stimulus itself and which bits can be divorceable, I think is absolutely a core part of the research program.
So the sort of higher order thought claim is that the second meta level is the one that is conscious, and then the stimulus level isn't. But you're not making that claim, I gather.
Yeah, so
Or are you?
Okay, I have so many thoughts. So yeah, I would say that the way in which the first order representation, whatever it contains, rises into phenomenology is through this second order monitoring process. But I wouldn't say that I necessarily subscribe to certain versions of higher order theory that kind of are a copy paste, where you have like a first order representation that's unconscious, and then a second order representation that is a carbon copy or like a distorted copy of that. Mm-hmm. So Richard Brown's higher order re-representation theory is kind of like that, for example. I'm more subscribed to that the higher order representation at the meta level might be more like a redescription of like the statistical properties of the first order representation. So is it reliable? Is it stable in time? Is it the same as it was like a little while ago? Is it compressible? Like all of those things. And then like perceptual reality monitoring theories, there would be a pointer that would be like, okay, this is like a reliable enough thing. What is that thing?
Okay.
And then you go point at those properties. And so you could see how aspects of the phenomenal experience are anchored in the first order representation, but through this are like broadcast or like brought into awareness, and then other aspects might be divorceable. Yeah.
Thanks so much. Really interesting talk. I really appreciated you also calling out the role that meta-science structures can play in advancing this area. And I just wondered if you could share a little bit about your perspective on the sort of strengths and also the challenges of working in large collaboratives in this theory-rich, complex and controversial area, as opposed to in a case where, you know, everybody knows what needs to be done and you just have to do the thing all together.
Yeah, so I'll start by saying thanks for the question. And I also think that while consciousness science might be particularly challenging for a number of reasons, I don't think that it's the only space in science where we're kind of awash in theory. And so one of the initiatives that I helped start at the Cognitive and Computational Neuroscience conference back, again, during the pandemic, lots of cool stuff happened during the pandemic, lots of terrible stuff, but was these generative adversarial collaborations where you kind of get multiple people who are on two different sides of a debate together. And there the goal was not to kill one of the theories, it was to have a productive conversation about what kinds of experiments would even need to be necessary in order to arbitrate those theories. So one of my favorite ones was a bunch of the Alex Pouget, Wei-Ji Ma people came together on the probabilistic population codes. And then all of Joseph Fisher's camp came together on the sampling hypothesis to ask, how is it possible that the brain represents probability? And we've got these two kind of seemingly mutually incompatible theories, but they might not actually be all that incompatible after all. So these are all big collaborations. And so we've been thinking about how do you even write down what everybody is thinking? How do you even align the vocabulary across the space? And how do you best track progress and evolution of thinking across time to capture which were the sticking points? So in addition to the credit assignment thing, I think that a lot of really maybe annoying secretarial work needs to be done in order to get this right. Lots of data sharing, lots of note-taking, but also a specific focus on making those data sharing and note-taking and documentation practices available to the scientific community in a way that's digestible, so you can watch the evolution of science across time. So I'm not sure if that really answers your question, but I think that right now as a PI, I kind of know what my lab is doing and I know what my friends' labs are doing. But in these big collaborations, it's really easy to forget what the other arm is doing. And so that's a really practical answer, but I think it's something that we got to pay attention to. Yeah. But yeah, thanks everybody.
Okay, next talk is going to be by